Leland's trout magnet is one of the most versatile baits on the market. And so today I'm going to go through the techniques on how to fish the trout magnet as well as 10 tips that are going to help you catch more trout. What is up, Outdoor Mavericks? Welcome back to the channel, and today's video dedicated to the trout magnet. For those of you that are new to the trout magnet is a grub-like bait, soft plastic that's about 1.25 inches long, that's very versatile, that you can fish on all kinds of bodies of water and in all kinds of different water conditions. Now, one of my favorite things with the trout magnet is it comes in these piece kits up to 152 pieces, and they are perfect to take with you on any body of water. Now, firstly, let's go through the different techniques and setups that you can use to fish the trout magnet. Now, the number one setup with the trout magnet is to fish it with a bobber. And for my main setup, I've got a light action rod about 7'6". I got about a 1,000 or 2,000 size reel. You can go up to size 3,000 if you'd like. I got 10-pound braid as my main line, all the way down to a uni-to-uni knot, and then to about 6 feet of fluorocarbon leader. Then I've got my slip bobber, which I can move up and down. And at the very end of that leader is going to be my 1/64 jig head with the trout magnet. Now, this is probably the best setup when it comes to fishing the trout magnet because you can fish it in multiple different bodies of water. Now, the other thing you can do to this setup is to add a little bit of split shot right above your jig head if you need to in fast current moving water. Now, the second setup for the trout magnet is the same rod, reel, and main line setup, but this time you're attaching the main line to a barrel swivel, a swivel with your fluorocarbon leader, then to the jig head. That little swivel adds a little bit of additional weight to allow you to bounce off the bottom, say in small creeks and streams where the water's maybe 1 to 3 feet, to get it down right off the bottom, to bounce it off the rocks and the sand and put it right in the strike zone of the trout. In this setup as well, you can add a little bit of split shot if you need to, but it's not necessary. Then setup number 3 with the trout magnet is to plunk this off the bottom, and even with a 1/64 jig head with a little bit of added split shot, you could technically plunk this off the bottom, especially if the trout are very close to the bottom, or say if it's very cold water or it's super fast moving water and those fish are right down on the bottom. You can technically plunk this setup, especially in like little ponds or big lakes, but with the trout magnet you really want to fish this in moving water, and that's why with technique number 1 with the bobber setup and technique number 2 bouncing it off the bottom with your jig head and a little bit of a swivel as some added weight are the best techniques to utilize and fish the trout magnet. For those of you that have never seen the trout magnet, it's a little 1.25 inch grub in a bunch of different colors, and when you get the variety packs, they come in about 10 different colors, and this one is the white one. And you can see here it's got a little bit of a tail action, so when it's moving in the water it gives a little bit of that action to the bait, which is the proper way to fish this. So now that we've gone through the 3 techniques on how to fish the trout magnet, let's get into the top 10 tips that are going to help you catch more trout with the trout magnet. And starting off the list at number 10 is to rig the trout magnet correctly. And this is very critical because with the right setup and putting the bait on the jig head correctly, you're going to be fishing this the right way to get the maximum amount of movement in the water to attract that trout bite. Now, the biggest key with the setup is to thread the grub all the way up the jig head, out through it, and get it as straight as possible. To get this as straight as possible, and then you've got the tail out here that can free flow and move as you're moving it through the water. So make sure that the first thing you do before you even cast out is make sure you got that grub threaded on there properly. And if you don't have it rigged on properly, take the grub back off, re-thread it back on. It's the most critical element to help you get set up before you even make your first cast to get some bites on the trout magnet. Now, tip number 9 has to do with the hooks, and you want to fish these with jig heads or small bait holder hooks. Now, if you get the multicolored bait kits, they come with jig heads in a 1/64 ounce in gold or silver. So you're already set up with those jig heads, and they have barbs on the back end as well to keep that grub on the jig head hook longer, so you're able to fish that bait more over and over again. You don't want to use non-bait holder hooks because the grub will slip right off and you're going to lose a lot of fish. And if you run out of jig heads, you can even use a size 8, a size 10, or even a size 12 bait holder hook. But when you're fishing the trout magnet, it's absolutely essential that you've got a bait holder hook, especially the jig head hooks. Now, tip number 8 is a great one, especially if you're low on baits, which is to reuse these baits to fish for other species like little perch, little bluegill. You can even catch bass on the trout magnets. And after you've caught a bunch of trout on your bait, it might be ripped up. The tail might be in shreds. It might not look the same, and it might be all torn up. But don't throw that bait away. What you can do is to utilize that to fish for other species. So to fully maximize the grubs in your trout magnet tackle box, keep all the ones even if they're shredded up, because you can use those to catch other fish as well. Now, tip number 7 goes back to something that we talked about in the techniques in the early part of this video, which is to fish the trout magnet with a bobber, and in particular, a slip bobber that you can adjust the depth of your trout magnet. Say when you're heading to a small pond, a little lake, a little stream, even a big lake, maybe even the river, wherever you're fishing the trout magnet, having a slip bobber gives you the best opportunity to make adjustments very quickly to get that trout magnet in the strike zone. I mean, one of the keys when it comes to trout fishing, especially during difficult times, is to fail fast. And by throwing out a couple casts, not getting a bite, make adjustments on your bobber. So say if you're fishing it a couple feet for those first couple casts, adjust it out another 6 inches, adjust it out another 6 inches till you get that bait right into the strike zone, or fishing it closer to the bottom where the trout might be hanging out. Now, tip number 6 is to fish the trout magnet in all kinds of conditions. And I'm talking about bodies of water that might have dirty off-colored water, low and clear. You have that summertime water in little creeks and streams that's uber low and uber clear. This is also a good bait to fish in the wintertime, to have something that's a little more subtle and easier for the trout to go after when they're not as hungry. And as I said before, this is why this is one of the most versatile and most effective baits on the market, is because you can fish the trout magnet in so many different kinds of conditions. And I love fishing the trout magnet, especially in transition times, say when we're going from spring into summertime fishing, or when we're talking about summer into fall transition time fishing, as well as fall into the winter time. Each one of those transitions can be really good to fish the trout magnet, because you have the versatility, you have multiple different colors, and you can fish this on all bodies of water. Now, tip number 5 is something that I do in the winter time with the trout magnet, and that's actually to snip off the tail end and just use it as a grub on the jig head to get that winter trout bite. Now, we all know how winter trout fishing can be super finicky and super tough, and sometimes with the trout magnet, that tail end action could be just a little bit too much, and the trout actually don't want to go after the bait. So if you're finding yourself fishing the trout magnet in wintertime trout fishing, take a moment, if you got your pair of scissors or clippers, and cut off the little grub tail end and make it a little bit more subtle of a presentation in the wintertime. Sometimes changing it up and making it just as simple as possible with less action in the wintertime in cold temperatures can actually lead to more bites. So if you're struggling on a cold winter day and you've got the trout magnet out, get those clippers out, cut the tail off, and see if that's the golden ticket for some big bobber downs. Now, tip number 4 has to do with playing around and experimenting with your baits and trying something different with the trout magnet. And that's actually to color them up and design them and add some stuff to the trout magnets with a Sharpie. Now, just like we can add a little bit of color, some nail polish, or some paint to spinners, you could do the same thing with trout magnet, only with a Sharpie. You can add some dots, you can add some lines, you can add some color and some designs to the grub heads with a Sharpie and change what the trout magnet might look like in front of the trout. With the trout magnet, we get so used to just fishing it out of the package and just figuring that we can get a bite. But some days it might be better to experiment, try putting some other colors or some slashes. Again, put some dots on there, especially like a couple little eyes, make it look like a little minnow or a grub, and that actually might be better for the bite than anything else. And especially if you're fishing the trout magnet with kids, let them put a little bit of design element into there and let them go out and fish it. The only caution I would say is make sure that you don't leave your Sharpie in the tackle box on a really warm day, or it's gonna bleed and leak all over. Don't ask me how I know. Now, tip number 3 with the trout magnet has to do with scent, and these grub-like baits don't have any scent with them. So what's tip number 3? Well, that is to add some scent to the trout magnets. Now, adding scent to the trout magnets is one of my favorite tips because if you're not getting bites just on the trout magnet, this allows you as an angler to experiment with different scents throughout the year or the body of water that you're fishing that the trout might be going after, and you can entice a really good bite. And that could be anything from nightcrawler to crawdad to corn to garlic, and if you have the right scent, you might have a fishing day of a lifetime. Now, tip number 2 with the trout magnet is give it some movement, and this is going to be your best friend when it comes to fishing the trout magnet effectively, and movement is key when it comes to fishing the trout magnet. Again, movement is key, and so if you're fishing a little creek, stream, or river, you already have flow of the water that's producing with the trout magnet, but on little ponds and lakes, you don't have that movement. So one thing you want to keep in mind is making sure you have movement, so adding maybe a few twitches every once in a while, just your subtle ones. You don't have to make it super big, especially if you're fishing this with the bobber. Just give it a few twitches, let that trout magnet rise in the water a little bit and come right back down. And when the bait a lot of times is on the fall after you give it some movement, that's when the trout comes in and slams the trout magnet. And now that we've got through tips 2 through 10, what's tip number 1 with the trout magnet? Well, that is to fish it in all seasons of the year. Now, earlier we talked about fishing the trout magnet in all bodies of water, but the trout magnet is so versatile, you can catch fish and a lot of fish on the bait all seasons of the year. And in my Yeti backpack that I carry with me trout fishing everywhere, it's one of the baits that I keep with me at all times of the year, no matter whether I'm fishing high mountain lakes, little ponds, little creeks, little streams, and there's a reason why I have the trout magnet with me in my backpack at all times. It flat out catches trout. And there you guys have it. Simple techniques and 10 tips to help you catch more trout with the trout magnet. I hope you guys enjoyed today's trout fishing tips video, and if you did, smash the thumbs up on that video, hit that subscribe button down below, and as always, you guys, the outdoors is a gift, share it with others.